rapper, first name greatest. Like a sprained ankle, boy, ain't nothing to play with. Started off local, but thanks to all the haters, I know G4.
So I've decided I'm just going to act as a catalyst in this episode, and the real question is...
I've resigned myself to
my role. Can you guys make Chris Bumstead better? His training?
No.
Okay, with him training? So
I would disagree. And I think I would...
You just said straight up no.
Well, better in some sense. I would disagree, because seeing Chris, like, we both lived here and trained in the same gym for this long.
Yeah.
Like,
you've paid a little bit of attention to his training, I'm sure.
Yeah. And every so often we've had little conversations here or there. Mm-hmm. And there are some things that he's brought up that it's like, well, this doesn't really feel all that good, and this, that, the other. It's like same thing with you having the conversation over the elbows. It's like somebody like him, like, there's always this perpetual argument of like, well, could you have made Ronnie Coleman better if you really changed what he was doing?
That's where I was getting at with that.
Right.
And
there's gradients to that.
Yes.
Where the difference would be is like, okay, well, Chris is the best in the world at classic. That's just the truth. And then to take it any further than that, it's like, could he be better? Yes, he could. Could he get bigger? Could he get bigger in some certain areas that he may be struggling with because of some limitations that are built in by the way he structures his training or the way he executes his movements?
Right.
Yeah. There's specific examples of, well, his elbows hurt.
Yeah.
Is he going to be able to grow them?
That's what I was going to say. From that alone, he could be better if you guys could work either around that or get to the root of the issue and fix it so he can train how he wants to train. That would be one way. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the what we don't know is let's say there's execution things that you fix or frequency, whatever. You change all that to whatever you think may be best. That's what we don't know the answer to. Will that make him any better or not?
Right.
We don't know.
Yep.
But you may as well, Chris is smart enough to probably think about it and be like, let me find out. The only way to find out is to try it.
Yeah. And I think actually this question becomes hard to answer, and it becomes very caricatured in its answer for whoever is actually giving one. Mm-hmm. Because we have to either side with like, well, could you have made Ronnie Coleman any better? It's like, well, that's a pretty arrogant statement if you're going to say yes.
Yeah.
That's tough. Yeah. If you want to be on record saying that your ideas could have made the best ever to have done it any better, that's pretty audacious.
Right.
So, like, you got to be careful with that, and that's on a personal reputation level.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take it there, really, because, I mean, I don't really give a shit. Mm-hmm. So I agree. To talk honestly, it's like, well, somebody like at that level, so I'll take it away from Chris and like bring it up to like Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah.
It's like the argument would be, and your point is right. It's like, well, he changed his split and how many times he was hitting biceps in a week. It's like, could you have made him any better? Like, maybe.
And if Ronnie was doing the GLOFF single arm pull downs and, would it have mattered?
Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah.
But there are some things that we do know. And the biggest thing about actually getting to your potential is like, well, do you have the actual potential? Potential meaning like, do you work hard? Are you consistent at it? Do you have all the variables set in a way that works? Are you genetically gifted enough to make it that far and continue progressing after X amount of time you've been doing it? Mm-hmm. It's like, if you have those, like, okay, well, what's the last thing? What's the prerequisite to all of those? The amount of time you're doing it. Mm-hmm. So if time is the variable, it's like, how long can you be held together without being strung together by freaking duct tape and Elmer's glue?
Right.
And that's the problem that, like, making the example of like Ronnie is like, that's really what it is. It's like, could we have made him physically better? Like, looking at him on stage, like, maybe not. But could he maybe have been saved from going through all the pain and suffering that happened as a result of the way that he did things while still getting the same results? I would say probably yes.
Yeah.
And that comes from and that's not me being arrogant, because it's not saying that like what I would have had him do if I had control over that would have made it different. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have made mistakes that wouldn't have led him there.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else that has similar ideas or better ones would have done the same. Mm-hmm. So it's not to say that if we had the ability to go back in time and make that change, like what we would have done would have fixed all the problems.
Yeah.
Not saying that. Really what we're saying is that are there some things that could have gone a little bit better, that could have made the longevity a little bit better? And knowing from the research that we have that we all use as like the counter argument to all of these types of talks. It's like, well, and this is also to the point of like the optimal versus non-optimal crew. It's like, well, we have the research to say that like hypertrophy is a, super general adaptation that you don't really need to be that specific about. It's like, okay, well, fair. Like the data does kind of say that, but there's also a lot of caveats to the data and how our research is actually performed that we take and use for people that those populations in those studies do not match in the real world that we're making comparisons to. And so, and I realize that might go over people's heads because I said that fast.
Yeah.
Meaning, we have data that says, okay, per trained individual, which in exercise science studies, typically, your trained individual is some college kid that goes to the gym twice or 3 times a week for the last 3 months to go and powwow around a bench with 6 of his buddies for 2 hours before they go drinking. Like, that's literally what your trained individuals are in most of all exercise science studies ever conducted are built off of. And so, yeah, you have trained individuals that are really untrained. They don't know what they're doing. They really don't have a lot of experience. They haven't been doing it for very long. They don't take it that seriously. And so you take those people and you put them onto whatever consistent training program that they use as their method in the study. Are you going to see hypertrophy happen with like this method versus this slightly changed method? You're likely going to see pretty much the same thing because they're starting from a relatively detrained spot, not doing things all that consistently. Their variables aren't all that dialed in. And so, yeah, you get a hypertrophy outcome that's statistically like not really that different from one another.
Yep.
But what happens when you take that to the actual populations we're looking at to make those, using that research on those people and taking that as the statement, hypertrophy is not that hard. It's very general. You can do whatever you want and it'll happen. It's like, okay, but if you actually look at the real world, how many people struggle with growing past a certain point? Which the same intellectual people that use that research as their base of argument will say after a certain amount of time, you're likely not going to gain more than 0.1 of a pound of muscle every 4 years until you decide that you give up because it's hopeless. It's like literally they make one argument coming out of one side of the mouth, and then the next breath is that. It's like, okay, so it's a super general adaptation that can be done doing whatever the hell you want, but then also it's so vanishingly small and so difficult for it to happen that you might as well give up after training for 4 years because your gains are going to run out. It's like literally it's the same people making both of those arguments at the same time, and they don't realize that they're making 2 opposite statements and having them coexist within their framework. And that's where the argument comes in with the optimal versus not optimal. It's like, okay, well, sure, it's a general adaptation, but we could use that, me and you, Ben, as part of our argument piece. It's like, okay, sure, it's a general adaptation. It can be done through a lot of means. So why don't you just choose this as your means? Because it's a little bit better orthopedically, and it'll last you a little bit longer in your career, and you may have less interference issues with other patterns in your training, so you could probably get better overall.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
So you could use their same bedrock argument to fight them with, but then you make that argument, the circuits cross, and you're like,
yeah,
you're stupid.
Yeah. Do you want to say why? Do you want to further explain your
when
no?
I said no, I meant no in an ultimate sense. So, in an ultimate sense, in relation to total hypertrophy, total aesthetic. But all of the nuances that Nick sort of detailed there, I would agree with all of it, and I would also add, on a more specific level to a Chris, or I'm not comparing Chris to Ronnie necessarily, but a Chris or Ronnie are a similar theme.
Echelon.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would say that, again, I would still say no in an absolute sense from just an aesthetic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would end up where they end up.
Yeah.
But I just think that the experience and the time difference between using the 2 different kinds of methodologies is what changed. So it's not exactly the ultimate result. It's how long does it take you to get there? And specifically, like you see a lot of times with pros, even just if you see 2 pros standing side by side, you can see weak points relative to the individual magnified to such an extreme extent that this is, that is the time to get more specific and more nuanced with your approach, right? So the amount of time that it takes you likely, or the amount of time that it's taken Chris likely, I think definitely would have increased to get to where he is now. Decreased. The amount of time would have decreased between wherever he started and where he is now. So less total time potentially training, greater potential results in that amount of time. And then also, just as Nick touched on a bunch, orthopedic related issues along the way, which I almost look at as the same thing. Yeah. So a lot of times people look at injury or orthopedic stress that's excessive for them to deal with in like a vacuum. And they look at it as just this pain thing over here. But the pain thing and the results thing are directly related, right? One affects the other.
Because it's time.
Right. So my training partner, for instance, right? Like 6 months, 8 months off. Where does that leave him in the terms of where he could have been X years from now?
Yeah.
And ultimately, there's nothing that you can do about it. But my hope, kind of with the information,
that ultimately doesn't mean that he's like, people also have this mindset of like, I missed 6 to 8 months. That's 6 to 8 months that I'm never going to get back. Ultimately, 5 years from now, he can probably going to be in the same spot. 2 years from now, he could be in the same spot. So at some point, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I would also just say that, like, in those specific instances, that the prioritization of becoming more specific, more optimal, whatever you want to call it, is the thing that allows people to return to play.
Yeah.
And is what allows people to, and that's why you often see people who, like you said, you had injuries or you had, a bunch
I wish you would have been around for me, man.
Right. Like it's just, a lot of people end up in that spot.
Want me to tell you all my injuries and
Yeah.
see what your general overall thoughts are? Like, maybe you don't have any, maybe you do.
Sure.
But there has to be some kind of genetic tendon. I don't know what I have, but obviously the pec. I don't know if you heard what that actually entailed. I tore it. The tendon came out of the muscle belly itself.
Great. Yeah.
Right, magnificent, right?
Great.
It did not come off the humerus.
Yeah.
Both bicep tendons.
That's like, I don't know if I ever met someone that has had that happen.
Yeah, and then if you've seen it, you can tell, and that's why that's why mine's so bad. I mean, the outer third of my chest it's gone. Mm-hmm. You can see the entire tendon. I mean, it's bulging out.
And what did you get that doing?
Bench pressing, of course.
Was it a flat?
Flat bench, yeah. 455 for 6.
Okay, impressive.
Yeah, I know, right?
Worth it?
No. God, no. This is the worst.
I'll ask you more about that later, but continue.
Yeah, okay. Both bicep tendons, adductor, both hamstrings. What else have I done? Just little things up in the quads, just all constantly, man. Mm-hmm. And I just completely stopped. When he gets back, he'll have an interesting insight on this, but I just completely stopped lifting heavy at all. Was my mindset, and this was still happening to me. I mean, I'm doing walking lunges with 35-pound dumbbells popping an adductor.
Right.
I tore my adductor pretty bad doing Bulgarian split squats in a Smith machine with 225. So, I mean, this is just something repetitive, always happening. I'm explaining to him my training history. I don't know how we got started on this and injuries and whatnot. Oh, I just said I wish you guys would have been around, obviously, when I was younger.
Yeah.
Well, we were to our point. Thanks, Nick. Yeah. To the point here in time and losing time, I mean, one injury, missing 6 months, 2-3 years down the road, ultimately, is it going to matter? Maybe, maybe not. But something like me, where I was missing year after year after year after year, that, along with obviously my mental health not being the best, is ultimately why I never made it. But I'm just asking him his general thoughts on and anything he thinks. There has to be some kind of like why that kept happening, or advice, or things that you guys could have done to help me, the 20-year-old me.
You got injured so often? Is that the question? Why
Yeah.
you got injured? I think partially recklessness. So like your biggest issue was your pec. Your pec injury was a reckless injury.
That one was reckless, yeah.
Yeah. The rest of them, not so much. But at the same time, like by your own admittance, and you've said this on the podcast, so it's not a surprise to anyone that's listening unless it's the first time. It's like throughout your career, like when you were not like prepping, you were like not super on it. Right?
Yeah.
And then when you were, it was like guns a-blazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like that big difference between the two, like part of it is restorative. Like you kind of need to have a little bit of a pullback when you're not like having to go like guns blazing, like it's fucking time to go.
Yeah.
And then off season is a good period of time to have that in there. But also like you weren't super on top of your meals. You weren't super on top of hydration. Your sleep has been terrible forever. Your stress has been really high. You've been like depressed and anxious for like
Yeah. So just a culmination of everything.
yeah, like the overall stress.
What about for the normal? Yeah, maybe not use me. I'm kind of I'm a shitty outlier. What about like? But there are people that are always nicked up and straining things and hurting themselves. And,
You know, though, I wouldn't say that you're a weird outlier.
no.
No, I think most people have that. Like, I mean, people come to bodybuilding. This is part of a topic that we didn't think we were going to cover much today, but just a little bit going into it is what brings people into bodybuilding.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, guys. Well, now, I mean, you're right. Now that I think about it, all the bodybuilders that have been training 20, 30 plus years, they all end up obviously shoulder replacements. Everything's replaced. They're all just crippled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and do you guys think, I mean, you're 23 and 24 years old, so you think that you're going to be able to prevent that? Like, you don't think that you're going to have joint issues?
Oh, I definitely will.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
What about you?
Depends what you think joint issues.
Pain, chronic pain is when you're older. Do you think it can be avoided doing the type of training that we do for?
In absolute, I don't think so.
Okay.
But I think that a lot of the strategies that you can use, or that people who are, we'll say, more informed about this kind of stuff can use, can really, really extend the life of a joint or the life of, just an individual who doesn't experience pain. Obviously, Nick and I have different aspirations from the bodybuilding perspective standpoint, and so once you get to a certain size, like even the size you are now, it's like you're carrying this super physiological amount of mass on your body. Just that connective tissues aren't necessarily well adapted to in any person be able to handle over a very, very long period of time. So even if you are doing everything in a very, very precise, mechanically sound way, at some point it's just a lot of fucking weight that you have to carry around all the time, 24 hours.
Yeah, and at some point we're human beings that aren't really supposed to be doing any of that.
Right. So you see the guys who are older now who were, really good bodybuilders back in the day, like someone like, I don't know, for instance, like when I see Dorian Yates walking around now, like he looks good. Like he lost a ton of weight, he cut it off pretty quickly. I believe when he stopped competing, and as far as I know, he's not like too fucked up.
No, he just
Jay Cutler's a good example too.
yeah.
So he like lost a ton of weight, right? Like pretty quickly.
Still looks amazing.
So I think doing those kinds of things goes a really, really long way. But to the point earlier of like your pec and your biceps and the more specific things, I think that kind of bridges another topic of just understanding just weight in general, and more specifically just the idea that like weight is not a number. Because when we're talking about weight in the weight room, we're not talking about a dumbbell. We're talking about like resistance and like how that resistance and that load interacts with you. So you might be holding a 35-pound dumbbell in your hands as you do a lunge, but your knee certainly doesn't experience 35 pounds of force, right? It experiences a whole host of things that are completely unrelated to just the dumbbell that you're holding in your hand, which is kind of a more nuanced specific topic that is like X's and O's kind of thing. But a point just being that this idea that like the weight is the only problem, or the recklessness, which obviously play a huge role, are the only problems. I think is only a very small piece of the puzzle, which is why the injury equation is just so impossible to really put a finger on.
Yeah.
So a multitude of things there that are all super interesting to talk about, but difficult to.
Yeah, that's why I just wanted to hear. I knew you would say something interesting, and that was interesting.
Thank you. Just a question now. Did the right bicep happen after the right pec? Or
yeah. Wait, the pec was my first one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and both my biceps were not. Neither of those were training either.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that was moving a couch and then lowering a garage door.
Yeah.
So it's just the decreased functionality of a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
was what it is.
Yeah. I mean, in that specific case, like you could draw a pretty clear, or not that clear, but you could draw a not so far out connection between the pec and the bicep. But in other instances, I'm not really. I couldn't really say anything for sure about that.
That's right. The point of that is that's where I see the biggest benefit of people like you, you guys helping upper level bodybuilders is I think you're good at keeping at least some functionality.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the purpose of what you guys are.
I mean, we definitely, and this is obviously movement specific, but I think people who really understand and act this stuff out move way fucking better than all the people that just stretch all the time and just fucking roll around on the ground and dildo gun.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask the questions for the dumb people. So, is stretching bad?
Can we pull it back just hold on to that one? Because I have a couple of things that I could say going back to you as a specific case.
What?
And then just a couple of things more generally. And the reason why I gave my answer to like whether or not I believe that by the time I'm done with my career, I'm going to have like chronic joint pain stuff. It's like one of the major things, and where I would see like the ending point for Ben and I being possibly different from going through the methods that are fairly similar to one another. It's like the difference in application is where that comes down to. It's like for Ben and most of the people that aren't trying to aspire to be like a high level pro, and the amount of time that you're going to put in and what is demanded of you to get there, like that's what leads to the higher possibility of the injuries and then the chronic pain at the latter end of life after doing the career. It's like, can you avoid generally, like if you were to just take a more general pop type person and then you put them into like, you have two trainers, you have Ben and then you have super meathead. Don't even name. Like you have their training method versus Ben's method. Are we going to get pretty much exactly the same muscular results? I mean, fairly close. Probably. Maybe the person that does the more meathead type training might have a little bit less. We'll make that argument just for argument's sake. But are they going to, like those two people, like the people that are getting trained by either Ben or meathead, are they going to come out of it in 10 years of doing that method? Is the meathead trained person going to be more hurt? Yes. Than the people that are going to be doing it with Ben's method.
Where's your study?
Right, where's the study?
Where's your fucking study?
Yeah, well, I think the study is irrelevant because we have enough people just anecdotally to speak on. It's like, okay, well, how many stories does any person that's listening to this or watching this, like how many people do you know that are just totally non-trainers, they don't really care about bodybuilding, like that's not their thing, they're just going to the gym and doing something. Make it even more extreme. They're not doing bodybuilding training. They're going to do CrossFit. How many people that go to a general gym and have a normal personal trainer that pretty much is just a rep counter? It just brings you across the gym with machine to machine and just like, here you go, 3 sets of 10. Let's just go. 1, 2, 3. It's like, okay, well, is that person after 10 years of training exactly like that, are they going to be probably mostly okay? Likely, versus the person that did CrossFit with meathead trainer at the CrossFit box for 10 years? Absolutely. Like how many people have we heard like this even like this hit like the tabloids and like every single thing that was publishing out when CrossFit like got its boom? Like how many people were just getting wrecked by CrossFit? It's like, okay, well, that's an extreme example, but I mean, if you think about it, it's just doing less complex movements in the same style of CrossFit if you have super meathead trainer methods. Say, okay, well, person can't really squat all that well, but you're dead set that they're going to do a barbell squat.
Right.
You don't care about all the specifics. You're super meathead trainer, so that's not your thing. So you have Betty Sue do barbell back squats, and she just cannot do it properly, but you make her do it anyway, and it's progressive overload time, boys. And so you just add some extra weight on the bar and then try to make it happen. Like, yeah, 10 years, Betty Sue's going to be hurting. But then if you're smart trainer, Ben style, okay, well, you can't really squat all that well. You don't really need to. Not at least not this way.
Yeah, right, not that way.
We can have you do it in another way. We can put you on this machine for right now. We can put you on a leg press if you just really suck that bad.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can just do another like skills practice with something else to get you better at doing that. And so maybe at one point in time you can have a different type of squat pattern.
Mm-hmm.
You go 10 years with a thought process like that versus like, nah, this is just what we do. Progressive overload, boys, fucking send it. Like, you're going to have two very different outcomes. And that
Right.
would remove the personal trainer scenario. And then you take that same example with just people that do their own thing in the gym. It's like, okay, you have a person that understands those concepts of scalability and what is actually necessary for you to progress. Then you can make intelligent choices about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do and how you tailor it to yourself.
Yeah.
And then you do 10 years of that if you're
Yeah.
just not looking to bodybuild. You're just doing the thing of fitness. And after 10 years, yeah, you're going to have different like pain issues.
Yeah.
Very likely. And that's just like self-evident.
Yeah.
And then you have a bodybuilder, like that's the extra level. It's like, okay, but the difference between Ben and I with our answer is Ben is kind of like, well, you can't really necessarily avoid issues. You don't always know when something might come, and you can't say from now and then add 20 years like what may or may not have happened as a result of what. Like that's kind of ambiguous. You can't really give a defined answer. But the safe bet is, yeah, there's probably going to be issues at some point because human bodies degenerate, especially under stresses.
Yep.
But you take that to the nth degree with me versus Ben. Ben not trying to be a pro bodybuilder, me trying to be a pro bodybuilder, and me being inconveniently strong. Okay, like, am I going to, and I'm going to make a caricature of your training, Ben, I'm sorry, but am I going to be able to get as big as I'm planning to get by doing all of my training on a prime functional trainer with a single arm everything, lining the angle for 5 separate subdivisions of my pack to get them all perfect?
Maybe.
Maybe. However, using other tools that are roughly equivalent for the kind of hypertrophy potential we can get with loads that'll be accurate to me by the point that I'm at that level, it's like, well, there's going to be a choice there. It's like, do I actually want to get that much better or do I not?
So what I heard from that is I should have him train me.
Hey, it's not a bad idea.
I'm the cable guy.
Yeah. He had a running joke for a while.
Yeah.
It's like,
Like the movie?
No, any.
That's the first thing. Like the Jim Carrey movie. That's literally the point. Yeah, the point.
Yeah, like anytime I post any training footage ever.
That was contextual. I interpreted it.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah.
Usually it's the opposite.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would say about that is like, I would be surprised, Nick, if that over time didn't start to shift a little bit.
Oh, it will. Absolutely.
So, my thing with you in the way that you train specifically, and again, like, I don't want anyone to think that it's actually that different. Like, there are a few things that are different, but, like, all of the movements apart from the stiff, like I said, you did the other day, like, I do them out of program.
Yep.
So, I do sort of wonder, like, at what point you make the determination of, like, this is sort of, kind of like run this well dry sort of a thing.
Yeah, that's my question to you. When do you know? Have you thought about it?
And then the question is, if you know at some point, well, you can never know, but the question is, if you think that you know that at some point that will change, and you can identify vaguely the reason that it might change, what might be the reason that you wouldn't sort of beat yourself to that chase? Or beat yourself to that punch, whatever the phrase is.
Because there's more left on the table to get with them, to get more proportionately for the effort and time put in for the stuff that I would do in favor of rather than doing it that way. So like difference being like me where I am right now and where I want to go. Am I right now, as my stiff leg this week was 585? Okay, like at what point do I decide that really the only thing I can do for hamstrings anymore is ham curls of different types? It's like, if I do that right now, how much better are my hamstrings going to get? They're still going to improve, but am I really going to be able to make the same amount of progress with the same amount of time and effort involved? No.
I don't know.
I would say no. I would say no, especially because like one of the things that we would definitely agree on is how are you going to get the most full hypertrophy of an entire muscle? You have to get into different positions. And really, the mechanical difference between you doing a lying ham curl or a seated one, you can make the argument that a seated ham curl is somewhat similar to the position that you're going to be in for like a hinge. It's not the same thing. The operative motion is not the same between knee flexion and hip extension. And then segmental hypertrophy does change based off of the position that you're in. And so
what Nick is saying is that the hamstrings are fully lengthened in both the leg curl as well as the hinge, but the hinge moves at the hip, whereas the leg curl moves at the knee. And the research has shown that more hypertrophy occurs closer to the knee with the knee motion, and more hypertrophy occurs closer to the hip with the hip motion.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I was going to say that, but thank you.
Yes. So exactly. And so that's part of the argument is that there are other options to do. And then it's also context specific. Like hamstrings are a specific case. It's like it's pretty limited with how much stuff you can do for hamstrings directly. Mm-hmm. So that makes an example, like a hinge is pretty much a necessity. Mm-hmm. And then if I change it to another type of hinge, there's other effective ways of doing it, but ultimately you need to...
What about this argument? You don't really need bigger hamstrings right now at this moment, but you're going to say I always need bigger hamstrings. It's probably what the answer's going to be. But what about, to your point, like, what if you just replaced a hinge with leg curls right now, so you had more energy for other movements because you don't really need bigger hamstrings right now?
There's an argument to be made there, but at the same time, how much is it actually taking away? Like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
because I'm a specific case here on this. This doesn't generalize to everybody. It's like I am specifically a very well skilled and strong squatter.
Yeah,
and so obviously the primary amount of work you're going to get for quads.
One thing I just thought of a question to ask you guys.
Sure.
You don't believe in redundancy really within the same session for the most part.
There's gray area.
Okay, there is?
Yes.
Okay. Because I had always assumed that you just don't. It's just you see things and it's like that's redundant. But like bodybuilders don't even think about that. They do 3 or 4 of the things for the same exact movement over and over.
Change the implement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you guys are implementing and targeting things and not creating redundancy.
It's useful.
But my question is, how do you think about things like, well, maybe if I do 3 leg curl movements in one session, maybe my hamstrings will get bigger?
That's a specific example that doesn't work very well. And here's a good way to look at it is that we don't necessarily pull out all things that may on the outside without much detail and context look redundant. So like a better example would be like changing the implement or the type of bicep curl you do in a session. Like if you do one bicep curl in a session, does that mean that you don't really get anything more out of doing another type of bicep curl? No. There's other positions that you can get your body into with other implements that change how the load, or rather the force and how it acts on you is different. And you're going to get different benefits from doing it. And so there's ways that you can, especially like looking at it from trying to puzzle piece together in a program how much you could possibly get out of any specific body part. There's going to be some redundancy because you're doing extra curls in the different types of curls rather than just doing 10 sets of a single one. It's like, okay, well, the other movements for bicep curls is redundant in the fact that they're also bicep curls.
Yeah.
But if you change the implement and the position you're in, it's not the same thing. It's not the same stressor. There's going to be added benefit because it's not acting on you the same way. And where one exercise is going to have specific strong points, weak points, positives and negatives, another one will have opposing ones, or some that are shared and some that are slightly different. And so you can stack things together in a way that they make most sense so you can get more overall work done, so you can get more stimulus, that isn't going to have the same buildup of drawbacks that you're going to do with only one of them, and you're getting the amount of stimulus you actually need.
Yeah.
So there's not like this fine rule,
Yeah.
like, okay, well, in a light session, only having one ham curl, like that's it, because adding another one doesn't make any sense. Like,
Right.
that's not really the case. Like, you put yourself
Just finding the sweet spot of work, basically.
sweet spot of work, and then dividing it up into implements and different ways of going about it and how you put it into the session that makes most sense for your goals and how they fit you.
Yeah.
And so having other ham curls in,
Yeah.
it's good. Having different kinds of ham curls in makes sense, but there's some examples of that aren't. It's like replacing a hinge with, if you have a lying ham curl and a seated ham curl, and then you do a kneeling single leg ham curl. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
there's not a benefit to adding that third one and replacing the hinge, because it's redundant on the same exact pattern. It's another ham curl.
Yep.
It's more stimulus for the hamstring, but it's not significantly different enough from the other two that it's helpful.
Yeah.
And, well, for that specific example, so I can say it, is doing like a single leg kneeling hamstring curl. Like, I'm pretty sure people understand what I'm saying with that.
Yeah.
So you do that, most often they're plate loaded. So it's pretty much useless 3/4 of the range of motion. And then it's impossibly difficult for 1/4 of it.
Yeah.
And so that movement is pretty much across the board absolute dog shit. Is worthless.
Yeah.
I would recommend no one does it unless you have a very specific reason why you're doing it.
Do you agree?
Yep.
Okay.
So as examples go, and I'll pull it right back to me again with me being a special case and other people that are kind of similar to me. It's like where the drawback starts to come and where I have to make that decision, like cutting the line on it, trying to figure where I would make that change and where I bled that well dry. It's like, well, into your question with me replacing a hinge so that I can have more energy to do something else. As a general rule, great idea. Hamstrings are a strong point for me, so I could pull a hinge out of it and then have a little bit more to spend on quad work, because that's where it'll directly make sense. It's not
Yes.
like I'm pulling hamstring volumes so I can do more bicep curls
Yeah.
later
Yeah.
at another point in my overall program.
Yeah.
It's not a calculus that works.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, so it would be pulling a hinge to make more room for quad work. I, as a specific case, and other people that would be similar, am a very well-skilled, well-patterned, and strong squatter. And that's on every single squatting implement that you could put me on.
Yeah.
And so, for me, having a hinge in there doesn't really affect my squatting in a negative way. Because what do I have to do as an accommodation if I'm already getting fatigued by a hinge? It's like, okay, well, not a real big deal. That just means I can't have another more internally stabilized free moving squat in that same session, which isn't a problem. Because doing like a barbell squat and a stiff leg deadlift in the same session is kind of asinine, especially if you're really strong at both.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. And so what am I going to be on? A hack or a pendulum or a leg press? Okay. And if that's what's going on, like, how do I really need to push the absolute loading to its limit? Not necessarily. I can get there and get the stimulus I need through doing higher volume, elongating tempos, pausing, intensity techniques, stuff like that, which are specific to me and use, because otherwise, and I've literally done this, so it's not like an asinine example either. It's like, okay, well, if I just go into a primary squat, which will be my hack, and I don't do those things and modify it, on the Cybex hack, that every single...
Do you gym pin the Cybex hack too?
Do I gym pin it? I don't have the Cybex hack, so
So everyone...
can't say for certain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably would.
Yeah,
Probably.
I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Probably. Hey, should we tell him that he made you puke? Leg day. He took it to you.
I didn't puke.
It's true.
No. But we were both feeling a little nauseous, which was good because we did a rest pause on the pendulum. But anyway, like the example would be what is actually real time an example for me. My hack on the Cybex, which is pretty much universally known as like the hardest hack that you can have in a normal commercial setting, unless it was a specific design. Okay?
Yeah.
So Cybex hack, pretty much universally known as the hardest one. I got up to putting 10 plates aside on that, which is gym pinning it and adding another 3 plates aside to it.
Yeah.
I think there's only one other human being ever that's done that, and that's Ian.
Yeah.
It's on literally the same Cybex hat.
Yeah.
And so I would be doing that for a set of 8 to 12, or I do 6 plates aside and I take it for a set of 10 to 20. JP, I don't know if he's done it specifically on the Cybex. If there's anyone else that has done it, likely him. Yeah, I would not venture to say that he wouldn't have been able to. He's a fucking freak, absolute monster. But that's a real example. It's like, okay, well, if I pull out a hinge, what's going to happen to those numbers? And then there's, again, a orthopedic problem again. It's like, okay, well, I can get more loading done, but is the stimulus necessarily going to be better? Because my progressive rate may still be exactly the same. My progressive rate going from the 6 plates for 10 to 20 rep, it's like, okay, if I can come up by 5% every other week, awesome. And now if I don't have the rate limiter in there with the hinge, okay, now I add another 300 pounds to it in total, and then I still have the same 5% over a 2-week period with the progressive rate. Is that actually going to give me a different effect on the overall hypertrophy? Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
So for me and people that were similar to me, like, it just doesn't make sense to make that calculation necessarily.
Yeah.
Unless I am in a deficit or a very specifically high stress point overall where I just cannot tolerate that amount of loading, and then I don't have that progressive rate to know that I can look back on and know what I'm progressing with. At that point, yes, pulling that hinge would be a fantastic idea because it is taking away energy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That makes sense. I have a question for Ben.
Context.
Ben, remember the other night when I asked you guys what you're training the next day, and he said push, and you laughed at him, and you said push. Why did you laugh at him and say push?
Because it's not push. It's like pull and then push and pull for a while and then arms and then more pull. So it's just upper.
Okay.
Upper body.
And that's what you do too, or what do you do?
My split is pretty.
Sorry, we're getting into the split talk.
It's okay.
It's just now it's basically upper lower arms with the rest in between the first lower and upper.
Okay.
So it's 5 days split.
Yeah. And you were saying, what were you saying? I'm not even going to try to repeat it. You were talking about you try to do a push with some kind of fibers and a pull with some kind of fibers.
I basically just organize it as like horizontal versus more vertical.
Okay.
That's pretty much the way that you can universally sort of look at it.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, your pecs and lats have 3 different like major subdivisions, so sections.
Yes.
And the ones specifically on the lat side, the ones that are higher up, those are the more horizontally directed ones, and then the lower that you go toward the hip, the more vertical they move relative to the arm. And so I was actually explaining this to someone the other day where don't overcomplicate it. Just think horizontal arm moving, horizontal fiber, vertical arm moving, vertical fiber. And that's just broad spectrum stuff. There are more specifics to that, like arm width and stuff like that, and intent. But pecs work the same way, right? So like everyone kind of is, a lot of bodybuilders are pretty good at just squeezing their pecs, and it's like your pecs function the same way as your lats do, just in reverse. And it's interesting because if you look sort of deeply at the anatomy and the comparison between the two, your lats and your pecs are basically just sort of mirror images. So when one specific division of one tissue is fully lengthened, the other is actually fully shortened. So if I fully lengthen the most horizontal upper lat fibers, and I most fully shorten the lowermost pec fibers, and vice versa. So you basically are able to sort of find the position for one tissue and the motion for one tissue by knowing the other.
Yeah.
Much like biceps and triceps.
Yeah.
Okay? So everyone knows like elbow bend, bicep, elbow extend, tricep. Obviously that can change depending on where the load is moving, but same concept. And so with the pec press, just because pecs tend to be in terms of like total surface area, I would think a little bit smaller. At least just visually and in terms of the differences between where your arms can move. So like your arms will probably move to what looks like a greater range with lat training as opposed to pec training. It's all kind of like here. Pecs work the same way. So just, kind of thinking about taking the pecs in the same direction that you would the direction that those fibers will run. An interesting one on that I think not many people are hyper aware of is that when people say upper pecs.
Yeah.
Upper pecs is like basically like sternal pec, so middle pec. Mm-hmm. There's like a very small difference between where your arm actually goes, and so people talk about like this is a point I've heard people make about the anti sort of optimal position is a super abducted arm. It's kind of like those two things do very, very similar. Perform very similar motions. So you can really have one pec exercise that's like taking the arm slightly up and across or slightly down and across. You're probably good with that. And especially, with both lats and the pecs, if you are choosing to do exercises that will, say, bias more of the longer ranges, more stretch positions of those muscles, the more overlap there is between the divisions. So if you do a dumbbell press and a lot of that load is heavy in the bottom of the range when the pec is mostly stretched, all those pecs at the bottom of the range of motion actually have a very similar function for the first half of that motion. They only really start to differentiate when you bring your arm across your body in some plate. Mm-hmm. So that's where like the exercise selection specific stuff and the exercise order stuff can be helpful. It's just understanding the specific functions and then when there's overlap and sort of when there isn't. But regardless of the context of the specific muscles, it's just like move the origin and insertion and do that.
So get them close.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a little bit oversimplified, but I would say for the most part, people can't go too wrong.
What are some of the other things that just drive you crazy that it's just flat out wrong that everybody thinks is right? Can you think of anything off the top of your head?
Driving me crazy. So earlier we mentioned the idea of where you asked the question of like, is stretching bad?
Yeah.
And stretching bugs me because...
Here we go. This is what I'm looking for. Tell us what bugs you.
Because... Okay, so a couple things. I think this needs to be contextualized from the perspective of when I'm talking about it. I'm a lot of times talking about it from the perspective of the average gym bro who wants to get bigger, maybe improve some range of motion if they're really stiff and limited and don't ever do shit for that. I'm not talking about the person who, like my girlfriend, for instance, is a ballerina and needs to be able to maintain a split to be able to be competitive, right? You're not going to really be able to improve that range without just shoving yourself into that position pretty constantly. But what I would say in terms of the context that I am referring to it in is most people... I always ask the question, like, why would someone like to do this thing? Or why would someone like to repeatedly use this modality? And the most common answer for stretching is like, well, it feels good, and like I open up a bunch of range, and like more range of motion equals better kind of thing. And we kind of went over the more range equals better thing earlier and kind of dispelling some of that. But what I would say to the whole feel good thing is the feel good thing is usually related to like descriptions of tightness. Like, oh, I feel tight. Like, I feel tight a lot. And so why do people feel tight a lot? Well, what do people do most of the day? What have we been doing for 3 hours?
Sitting.
Fucking just sitting on our ass.
Yeah.
Right? So 99% of the time, this is just client-specific experience. When people tell me that, I say, go for a walk. Well, magically the tightness is gone. So people, I think, get really, really hooked on addressing the symptoms, right, as with many other things, rather than just trying to address what the problem was in the first place. It's like all these Band-Aids just get kind of like, and then like you don't even know what Band-Aids you're going to need as a product of the extra thing that you're adding.
Yep.
Right? People don't look at things like stretching as extra stress. What if you have a client who, and I've seen many personal trainers do this, like with my own eyes, their client will ask them to stretch them, like some sort of qualified
physical therapist or professional, which they never are. And they usually land on the floor and they straighten their knee and they fucking just shove their leg like over their head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, imagine that you're like working with a 40-year-old, 50-year-old patient who's starting to develop these like osteoarthritis type issues, maybe my uncle, last time I was talking to, you started to develop bone spurs a long time ago, apparently, and had no idea. Because the symptoms don't always manifest immediately. Right? So you may be taking someone into an end range joint position or beyond that position, and just completely violating their structure to a degree that you don't even know and they don't even know in that second. But like, yeah, you should probably stay away from that kind of a thing, because imagine you do hurt that client, and then you got a lawsuit on your hands, and you got all kinds of things going for you. So whenever a client asks me to stretch them because they haven't been asked that before, I'm like, go somewhere else. And if that's the deal breaker for you, then like, yeah, this is worth it. So those are sort of my main qualms with the whole stretching thing. It's not that I think you're going to die if you do a little stretch, and again, in certain contexts it is appropriate, like the dancing context, the gymnast context. But the average gymmer walking around who just wants to feel less tight, I say address the cause and the root, don't address the symptom. And a lot of times that can be as simple as like focusing on your daily steps, or not even just a total absolute number, but just more frequency of changing positions. So something that people say, like, what about a desk job? It's like, okay, standing desk. And it could just be alternate every 20, 30 minutes between sitting and standing. That's what I do when I'm sitting at my desk for a long time, doing work and stuff like that. So I would say that's a big issue.
What else? Is there anything else bodybuilders in particular should be doing in your opinion? What do you have something to add?
Yeah, if I can add something there, because that's something that we've disagreed upon, and I've actually put up counter posts to you in the past just to clean up the gray area, because I know a lot of people follow both of us at the same time. That there's, as much as that is exactly true, and I have no disagreements with anything that you've just said, I would add to the top of that is that there's going to be some scenarios and some people where they're going to have those tightness issues, and it's going to be a significant enough issue that us walking them directly into a session while they're having that, it's going to be really hard for them to do most things and get a lot of quality out of it and feel good doing it. And so there's going to be, the time spent of you figuring out, like, okay, your method is do a little bit more warm-up sets. Just spend a little bit more time, get you there, and don't do anything extra out of the norm to get there. Totally valid point on that, but there's always going to be like some exceptions to that rule, where there is, even without being a dancer or whatever else, that you need that excessive range. There's going to be some people that, like, somebody doing general training or bodybuilding training, they got to do something as a press in a high angle. They literally cannot get up here. It's like, okay, well, what do you do with them? It's like, okay, we're just going to have you do a lot of incline pressing, a lot of reps of it to try and get you there. It's like, okay, well, maybe you can get there now, but do you have it with the control you need to move the amount of load you need it to? No. And that's the same reason why I do my warm-ups the way I do them. Is that, okay, well, can you get there? Maybe. Can you get there with the kind of control and the safety and the confidence that you really need to execute properly? No. And does necessarily walking fix that? Maybe to a great degree, but not always and not fully. And so then there's the argument that your argument will probably come in, and I'll speak for you for just a second, is that your argument would be probably, well, if you can't do that movement without doing extra stuff, do another movement. Also, context specific. It doesn't always work that way depending on what that specific issue is. And so where I've disagreed with your take on it in the past has always been where that gray area sits. It's like, okay, well, maybe walking is going to help like the overwhelming majority of people, and it very well likely would, because most of us sit on our ass way too much, don't get up frequently enough, and don't actually go and take our walks. Like, that would clear up a lot of issues for a lot of people, but it's not going to work for everybody. There's going to be some things that they still need to do within their training sessions that they just cannot do without a little bit extra. And in that case, then yeah, there's going to be some things that you could implement that will help them. And if stretching is one of them, and stretching should be paired with active work to go along with it, not just stretch and then load. Should be some integrative work and a little bit more patterning involved to get that safe and actually have it function properly. But that should be in there to help them in that case. And there's also going to be some examples of people that may listen to this or what you have to say on it that will hear what you're saying and be like, oh, like, I just shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't. And then they'll go in and they'll have some problems. They're like, I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. It's like, well, maybe you're one of those people that, especially if they have a job that they actually don't have the option of getting up and walking around and going make those changes. Like, you have a county sheriff. Okay, they have to sit in their car watching the road for hours upon hours. Okay, can you really tell them to like get up and go walk around for like 15 minutes every hour?
Yeah, take a break. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, no, you can't. So like, there's going to be people that just don't have that option. And so just, I'm here to paint over in that gray area that there's going to be some places where that's necessarily going to be there to give people what they need out of their training that they may not be able to in another way, because your base option, just move more, may not be accessible for people just based off of how their life works. And then some people that can will still have some specific issues that you can help with that can be done through means that are outside of just doing a little bit more warm-up sets on the movements you already planned them to do, or change them to another exercise entirely, especially if they're going for a very specific goal, like they're bodybuilders and they're trying to really progress in bodybuilding. Their options for making substitutions of movements are going to be much more limited on how you're able to do that, because there are things and positions they need to get into for them to get the exact result on their physique that they need. So there's going to be more context to that.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would add, as far as like if you are going to implement those, some form of stretching methodology, is if you feel like you need to access that range for whatever reason, and you've determined that that's going to be the correct sort of course of action for you, and that you will get that maybe just through, either altering exercise order or adding an exercise beforehand or something like that would maybe load you into that position a little bit better. Do the stretching like gently and not in a way that is, because most people, I think, whenever they do the stretching, they're kind of looking for that like painful sensation and stop point. You actually don't want to really get to that point. You'll be shocked at how rapidly range improves with just the smallest amount of tension. Like, your brain is going to be very, very good at sort of rewiring things, and the muscles themselves are going to be really good at shifting fluid when called on to do so. So don't sort of shoot for the moon and assume that like 0 to 100 is the answer. It's more like 0 to 5 to 10 to 20. There it is. Maybe I'll stop there for a little.
And holding it for a longer period of time, like 10 seconds, correct?
Yeah, and
upwards of probably a minute, 2 minutes.
I mean, you could do a ton of different things, right? But you could also just sort of, that could change day to day.
Yeah.
So
I got a question.
Yeah.
What would you say you're best at? What's your specialty, like as a coach? What would you say?
It depends. When you say coach, because
Well,
like
as a whatever you want to
yeah.
in regards to everything that you do.
I think actually my strong suit, I thought about this actually weirdly a good amount, like subconsciously.
Yeah.
I think I'm decent at simplifying information not to a point of degradation of the information. So like the essence of the information is kept without losing or without the more complicated terminology or the you kind of see what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would be one piece of it. The second piece of it would be, I think, specific setup with people who really, really struggle to set themselves up and conceptualize what they need to do.
Yeah.
I really harp a lot on understanding like the basic physics component of things. Probably a little bit too much, to a point of it seems like I don't value other things as much. So a more concrete example would be like, I often tell people not to focus too much on things like mind-muscle connection.
Yeah.
And I harp on that a lot because I think there's been this shift almost excessively toward it.
Mm-hmm.
And then less so on just the, hey, what are the forces involved in this activity, and do they make sense for what you're even trying to do in the first place? So what I try to get people to understand when I'm working with them in person, because it's just very difficult to do when you're looking at a video and you're responding, not in real time, is to try to get them to understand like what they're actually trying to do with the force.
Yeah.
Because once they can sort of conceptualize that on one exercise, they see it across an array of exercises that are similarly or that similarly sort of resemble that major goal. So a really common one that I get frustrated with in terms of people fucking it up on social media is the pull down variant that Nick popularized, the yelling one.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this before, that I think Nick is he either doesn't care enough or is too reserved to shit on people. But I'm completely comfortable, like most of you just completely butcher this, and like he's not reposting it because you did it correctly. He's just like reposting it because it was nice of you to tag him and do it. So just to make that very clear. Getting people to understand like what the actual direction of their arm is and what the actual direction of the load relative to that, and what specific cues after that they can use is, I think, my strong suit. And so I really enjoy people. Some people reach out to me who are just like local to New York, and they just want to do like an hour and just go through like 10 exercises.
Mm-hmm. He's very smart.
And it's I appreciate that, but it's very easy to work with people who have a good sense of their body first, because once you set the load up, it's like it just clicks. A lot of the time people have to spend way too much focus or way too much energy on the mind muscle thing because the load isn't moving in a direction relative to them that makes sense for the movement, right? So just to cap it off with something concrete again, is with the pull down variation, what you see a lot of times is people moving way too far forward underneath of the cable, and as their arm comes up, it's almost to a degree where like the load is so far directly above their head that it's almost like they need to do this.
Yep.
And so the only way to get around that is to basically like shift away from the arm, which is the entire purpose of the exercise. So just understand like, hey, this thing should just be like the little in front of you, and then they're like, oh, I feel so much better.
If I'm 25-year-old me and you guys are around, I'm contacting one of you guys and I'm going to say, can I come see you for 3 or 4 days? How much money do you want? Show me how to do every movement correctly. I would do that. And you guys should, what do you guys want for that? Like, can I be your manager? And anybody that wants to do that with him, contact me and we will set it up. It will go through me. Yeah, because seriously, man, like imagine how much, to your point, how much, well, some people aren't even going to ever get to their goal because they're not doing things optimally. But like, that's the one thing that they can control and they can learn and do it. And that at least is going to give them a shot to get there. And then that's at least going to help them get there as fast as possible. So if anybody wants to set that up, let me know.
I want to pull out one of those things.
Yeah.
You touched on it very briefly. And
Yeah.
we should leave this topic as the last thing because we're going to finish 3 hours here.
Yeah, I know.
So, yeah, I know. I just looked at my watch and was like, oh my God. Because look, it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, kill me.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to edit this and listen to this for 30
Well, you know, yeah.
But, mind muscle connection.
Touch on that. That'll be, and what do you have to say about that? I've never asked you about that, actually. I'm interested. Yeah.
You have before, but you've forgotten.
Remind me.
I think mind muscle connection gets a pretty bad rap, and it goes through the pendulum swings, like you said. There's going to be, because I was at one point one of those people on the other side that was like, you line things up, you really don't give your body any option other than making the muscle you're trying to get to do it, and then that's it. It's like, that's it. It doesn't matter what you're feeling. It's like, that's just what's going to happen. You set yourself up properly, it's going to do its job, which is still true, mostly. But the mind muscle connection, I think, is just mistermed in an awkward way that makes it not understood very well for what it actually is. So when people get into this argument back and forth over it. They're not really actually explaining it in language that makes sense to either of them. Because like the more mind muscle connection group of people, or like the bro-y side of things is what people would understand them to be. It's like the mind muscle connection is the most important thing, and that's
Squeeze. The squeeze.
yeah. But even that is like a caricature where it's actually useful to think about it that way in some context, because it guides you towards what the goal would be.
Yeah.
And then on the opposite side of it is exactly that first argument. Like you set yourself up, get everything to line up mechanically, and then it just is what it is. It's going to work. It's like there's truth to both. And the thing that people aren't understanding about the two opposing arguments is they're actually the same argument. It's just your intent with it is different. So what I see mind muscle connection as is just our awkward way of using language to label how am I going to do this movement once it's set up properly, so all of those boxes are ticked off. How do I set up and then execute from start to finish in a way that doesn't allow me to micro adjust and make little squirmy micro movements, or allow those normal tendencies that human bodies have to be the most efficient that we can be, and then turn themselves on and off and only use exactly the amount of force that's needed at one point or another in a range of motion to get us through the hard spots. Like, I'll make a concrete example. So mind muscle connection on a bicep curl. We'll use a dumbbell preacher curl. Okay, well, there's a ton of people, and I use this example for a reason. There's a ton of people, more than any one of the three of us would like to know the statistic on, that'll do a dumbbell bicep preacher curl and not feel their bicep.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And in the one camp that we would make the argument, you set things up and necessarily this is how it works. Bicep's going to do the work. It's like, well, you're here. It is elbow flexion. Like, yet your bicep's going to do it. But how overall, like, what's the quality of that overall movement? If you're down here, you set up, and then you start moving, it's like, okay, well, here, you generated a whole lot of force to get it started. And then what happened from here to here? And then what happened from here to here? And here to here? And here to here? People that are only listening, I'm only moving my arm a couple of degrees every time I said and here. Okay. And so what you would see on somebody that's just, you have their arm exposed and they're doing a bicep curl, you'll see as they initiate, bicep contracts and you can see it visually. And then it relaxes and the arm is still moving, but it relaxes. And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't actually make sense.
Yeah.
Like, and then it just continues to move and it just contracts as it needs to continue to output the amount of force necessary to continue that motion. And then you get to a point where at bicep preacher curl, you get to a certain point, your bicep doesn't really have to do any more work because your hand is above your elbow. And then all of that is aligned to gravity. So you get to this breaking point where you have to generate the last amount of force to get it all the way up. And then there's nothing. And your bicep really kind of stops doing anything. And then you let it down, and then it's like, whoop, it comes back together again to contract to carry it
Yes.
on the way down. And then depending on how much you control on the way down is how much you're going to get the contraction to happen. But that whole way, you're having a feeling of whether it's contracting or not. Okay? What happened through that whole range of motion, if you're not thinking about mind-muscle connection at all, it's like you moved it and had the minimal amount of contractions within that arc that you could have possibly done to generate the amount of force to continue it moving. And you utilize that momentum in creating just enough force again and again to carry it through so that you did the minimum amount of work you needed to for the same amount of work. The physics definition of work. Okay? Is that going to be the same quality as somebody that's focusing on mind-muscle connection, where they start from the bottom, they set themselves up perfectly, and then as they move, they are trying to focus on, is the bicep contracting as hard as I can get it to? Is it still after I move 5 degrees? Is it still while I move another 5 degrees? Is it still while I move another 5 degrees until you're all the way into the top again? And then once you're there, are you contracting it to hold that actual contraction of the bicep so you have control of the end range, and then letting yourself down with control again so you carry that same load that's in your hands to get the most work out of it you possibly could.
That's the difference. And that's what mind muscle connection is. It's just our lazy way of turning. Did you make a whole lot of micro adjustments? Like you, instead of just having it be the example of you building momentum, it's okay, well, did your shoulder pop up? Did your shoulder elevate and you had something else help you a little bit? Did you do, I don't know, your elbow turned in a little bit or out a little bit and your hand twisted and you got a little bit of extra flexion at the wrist? Like, it's all these tiny little micro adjustments that end up happening where you could have set up right. And if you set up properly, which is like that framework of thinking, you set up properly and you move through space. Did the job. Good. Nothing else matters. No. That's not true.
Yes.
Because the mind-muscle connection is just our way of saying, doing that set up properly, now have you eliminated all of those extra leaks in the performance of that movement that are going to be there by your body trying to find efficiency for energy? Are you eliminating all of those or not? And if you do, your quote-unquote mind-muscle connection will be much greater.
Yeah.
Now, there's a further level that you can take it where that's the only thing you care about, and then you throttle yourself away from ever progressing up your volume on exercise, and that's counterproductive. But those really far-end caricatures of the argument are what end up painting everyone that's in the middle of it to just fight at each other. It's like, you guys have the same exact argument. You're looking for the same exact goal. You're just not speaking in a language to each other that makes sense, because you're using the backing of the argument of the most extreme of both camps to formulate the language for you.
Right. And I think that really well said, and I think a couple additions I would make is the first thing to the last point is that I think most people think of it as just squeezing things.
Yep.
And what Nick is describing, I think if I could articulate it as a single word or two words, would be specific control. So I almost look at it as like you have this intent, you have the setup, like you said, but the mind-muscle connection isn't something necessarily that you are, I don't know if it's going to make sense, but willing to happen. It's more so like you're paying attention to what's happening. And so, if you were to just sort of make a muscle with your arms and squeeze your biceps, you would also tend to feel that you couldn't really do that without your triceps also co-contracting. And a bridge curl needs to happen to some degree, but not enough so that you're squeezing the shit out of your arms so much that like you're basically fighting yourself. Right. So it's that sort of intricate balance that requires you to pay attention, where you have enough of that intent, but not so much so that you're actually working backwards. And I think that where this really, speaking of sort of extremes on it, comes to light is in, we'll say, like, take the most advanced, pro who's never paid attention to really anything other than like be a meathead and just squeeze shit and make sure you feel the muscle kind of a thing, regardless of the force, regardless of the setup, physics, whatever. And then take polar opposite extreme where you have, and I've worked with a bunch of these people who have literally never lifted in their life, and they have no sense of control, they have no sense of what they're feeling. You ask them what they're feeling in a curl, and they tell you that they're feeling their ass cheek or something like that. That is literally, that literally happens actually.
They felt their ass cheek?
They felt their quad because their legs was forward and they were fighting for friction, whatever. But the point just being that you have to kind of, you don't have to, but it's advisable to, in both of those circumstances, understand the other extreme, where like, if you are working with the person who's never lifted, the only fucking hope that you have for them to do it correctly is for you to set it up well. Because they're going to fuck it up even if you set it up well, and the less and less that you set it up properly, the less of a hope that they're going to have. So, but on the other side of the spectrum, you have the person who's just squeezing things, just tossing things, then it's so much easier to work with skilled people when they sort of know, even though they might not know the setup stuff, if you can kind of just be like, okay, put this here, and then just go like that, and they just do it, and then they feel it, and they're like, oh my god, there it is. So both sides of the spectrum can utilize sort of all of the nuances on both ends. I think are on opposite ends to their benefit there.
And there's something to be cleaved out of that as well, is that you're using it as a guide. And what you're saying makes way too much sense for people to actually utilize for one reason, is that when you're thinking about the mind muscle connection and whether or not you're going to be focused on it and whether it's a good guide, there is a difference between getting yourself into a mind muscle connection that you can feel it because you're fighting those micro adjustments and getting your specific control down. Mm-hmm. That specific control, if you're observing it as it's happening as a result of you doing those things, it could also be confused as people just contracting things in positions that they're not necessarily mechanically well designed to do.
Yep.
So like a good example of that is, and you're gonna love this example, it's doing a sumo anything. And that's a specific area of it where it gets really annoying for people because we're trying to like parse out what's going on there. It's like, well, mind muscle connection is important, it's a good guide, but it can also guide you wrong.
So real quick, guys, you don't have to go in depth. Sumo stance stuff is not good for glutes. Tell people that.
Not at all.
Okay, thank
Not
you.
at all. Because you're already starting in a position where it's your glutes are getting close.
I told him not to explain these things.
No, I'm doing it because I have to.
Okay.
If you're already in an externally rotated, abducted position at the hips, and you're already like pretty far into extension, like what are you?
Where do you go?
Glutes. Because
Yeah.
that is literally the action of the glutes,
Right.
to get you there. If
Yeah.
you're already there, what are they going to do to help you?
Yeah.
Almost nothing.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting significant lengthening and shortening through range of motion that you're loading them into, they're doing almost nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, if you think about it, if you're like, a sumo deadlift is a good one to go with because people think sumo deadlifts hit their glutes. It's like, no.
Well, most people I feel like doing sumo deadlifts are actually doing sumo squats.
Yes, more so.
Yeah, and they think that's hitting the glutes.
Yeah, because people don't actually know how to do a sumo deadlift.
Yeah.
For the power lifter.
Right.
It's vanishingly low proportion.
We're talking mostly about like bikini girls and girls trying to build butts. I'm seeing them sumo deadlifting, which are actually sumo squatting.
Yes, sumo squatting,
Yeah.
which doesn't really help.
Explain.
Because you're already getting yourself started in a position where they're already very short.
Yeah.
And if the muscle is already very short, and then the motion, because a motion like that is mostly happening at the knee anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's like your glute isn't really acting on
Yeah.
knee extension.
Yeah.
It's not really helping you.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a little bit of hip flexion and extension happening there. That's the only movement that's available to you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be some, but not nearly enough for it to be effective.
All right, well, let's do a topic on. I want you to talk about how to get glutes, how girls can get glutes. One episode.
Quick answer: do all the stuff that do.
I do. All right, thank you.
Literally train like a dude.
Yeah.
Leg press.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Both of you saying that. Yes. And that's where like I have an issue with like. Not an issue. I don't want to say an issue. I don't have an issue, but
Now you can say it.
yeah, well, just like the bikini training that people have these girls doing, it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense. They're the only difference between the bikini division and the bodybuilding division. They're doing the same thing. They're still adding muscle to their body. Your genetics determine the shape,
Yeah.
right? It's just how much do we put on? You know, how much muscle we put on. They're doing the same exact thing we're doing.
Yeah.
So really the difference is food, drugs, and they're girls.
Yes. And then there's a caveat in there that I would like to add in, and we can end it on this point.
Yeah.
Weigh in and have Ben add anything if he wants to, and then we can say our goodbyes. Bikini girls specifically, because they're getting looked at and they actually don't want to have really big hamstrings, abductors, and quads. In their case, I'm not excusing doing sumo anything. Useless for you because it's going against your goal anyway, because what's going to be doing the work? Primarily your quads. Helpful, really. Not helpful at all.
Right.
So you're going to be training like a dude. You're going to be doing your lunges. You're going to be doing split squat types.
Yeah.
You're going to be doing leg press and squats, hinges. That's what's going to build your glutes. But there's a difference here, because if we're looking at women's figure and physique and all the more muscular classes, that fits more so like training like a male would for male bodybuilding, because we are looking at it that way. It's overall tissue you're gaining and you're training your lower body.
Yeah.
Like that's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And then coincidentally, pretty much all of the compound movements that we do for our lower body are going to significantly hit your glutes.
Yeah.
So awesome. It's all going to get touched.
Yeah.
Perfect. But then for bikini, because they need proportionately much larger glutes than they do hamstrings, adductors, and quads, even though my knee-jerk reaction would be like, throw your little ankle cuff setup away so you don't do the stupid bullshit cable thing with one leg and do it in 12 different angles because you think it does something, and sit on the abductor machine, because it really makes a whole lot of sense to do that, to do your piriformis extensions. Like, really helpful. But in their example, it's not a great movement to be doing. However, the reason that it makes sense is because of the fact that they are doing it in exclusion of the other muscle groups that would be getting that same stimulus by doing another movement. Like putting in a hinge just to get glutes. It's a good idea. You're really going to train your glutes on a hinge. But they're also trying to limit how big their hamstrings are relative to their glutes. And so there's going to be a gray area, same with squat.
Yeah, but it depends at where they're at in their development, though.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my point. Most of them aren't even close to reaching that spot where you have to make a call like that.
Nope.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yep. Which is also fair.
Yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, so just kind of 2 points maybe to cap it off here is one, any of the sensation, because this all really started from the mind muscle connection thing, is any sort of position where you are feeling an extreme amount of sensation, I usually categorize simply as like an exercise that you are fighting yourself doing. So, for example, something that you see a lot with very, very wide stance in anything, if you're doing a squat, if you're doing a sumo deadlift, you see knees crashing inward, right? There's really just hips moving inward. And whenever you see hips moving inward, a lot of times that's literally just your hips moving into where the width of your actual sockets are. And so if you stand really, really wide, like you're doing a sumo deadlift, and then you just do this body weight and you stand up and you squeeze your ass, you'll feel a lot of stuff because the glute in that position would actually pull your leg inward, would pull your leg outward. Not to mention the fact that if we can categorize the glute in 3 major divisions, the two bigger divisions pull the leg in, they don't pull the leg out. There's only one that pulls the leg out. So even if you made the argument that like, wider stance, leg out, glute thing, you would be doing the opposite action of 2 of the major divisions. And so with the whole contraction sensation thing, just look at it from the perspective of you can put your legs wide, you can do this whole abduction thing. But just understand that all of those divisions are going to function much like the fan-shaped muscles in the upper body, being which we talked about, the pecs, the lats, and they all function tighter to the body. So that's why things like lunges historically have worked super well. That's why things like leg presses historically have worked super well. And the reason, again, the whole sumo deadlift thing, I think, has blown up is just because of this, mind muscle intent, these EMG research papers showing higher activation and all that bullshit. So I would just say
EMGs do show a higher activation on a sumo deadlift for the glutes.
Right. So a big reason that is because of the thing that I was sort of mentioning.
That's what you're just saying.
Okay. Just think about it from the perspective of like your body is trying so difficult and trying in such a costly way to manage the joint position that like all of the tissues, because like if you took the EMG of like let's say adductors in that same position, they would be on fire. If you took the EMG of fucking anything around the hip, it would be like please just like stay in the socket,
because it has to stabilize.
Right. So if you're going to put your legs that wide, you're going to like test this for yourself. Just squeeze your ass and then just hinge forward a little bit. And then what you'll actually notice when you hinge forward is that regardless of how hard you squeeze, you'll actually lose a bit of tension in your ass. Even if you just physically put your hand on your butt, you squeeze your glutes, you hinge forward, you'll notice that immediately that tension rises. So I think those are all points to kind of focus on.
Yeah, this is all really awesome stuff. I mean, we keep talking for 10 hours, so we're going to cut you off, or I'm going to cut you guys off, and we just need to have you back on.
Yeah.
And
back.
Yeah, and you'll be back sometime often, right?
Yeah. I have to.
Yeah.
This is when we have a choice.
Yeah. We're not giving you a choice,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been
We'll see what initiated.
Sworn in.
Yeah, you've been initiated.
Yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
it's an honor.
Yeah. The hazing.
Sat on the couch.
That's a on the couch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Man, this was fun. All right.
Casting couch video coming on alternate platforms.
Okay, that's how it stops. Cut it off. We're good. Yeah. Just end it right there.